left off the last time. We had basically installed our stuff, and this is sort of series 2 of our Yeoman 1 backbone RequireJS series, if we call it that, and getting the next step to where we can actually load our page and load our mocha tests was actually pretty involved. So I'm going to do it a little differently than usual this time. I'm going to actually just show you what I did, show you some debugging tips. I might put it up as a repo or something like that, but it's going to be a little hard for me to just type all this stuff in. So let's look at our app index, which is the main page that you get when you build a Yeoman app. And this is all boilerplate, but the thing I want you to look at is here at the bottom. They point to RequireJS, and this is a convention. If you haven't used this, look for one of my other videos that goes over setting up a testing environment with Yeoman and using RequireJS. But essentially the convention is to use this data main attribute and point that to sort of your root RequireJS runner, and that will have the configuration. There's other ways to do this, such as using a config file, but this file will essentially become your RequireJS. It'll hold your RequireJS configuration and will become sort of the root relative path for the rest of your RequireJS stuff. So this actually just points to RequireJS itself, and so if we go into this script main, which I have over here, this will come, I think, closer to looking something like that. Well, and actually, it might just be the jQuery part. But as you can see, I've added my app and my lib and all of these things. And remember, this is now kind of all relative to this app scripts directory. So I've got app in the same directory. Let's actually look at our folder structure. So here's app scripts, and I have app, main, mylib, and temp was where I was doing some debugging. So this is all relative to this directory. And so you can see that, for example, one up from scripts and then is app, and then over is components. So you can see most of my components, I went up one and over into components and just loaded them all. Vendor is right off the scripts directory, so that was pretty straightforward. And I had to, at a later step for the mocha part, I had to make a symlink to RequireJS because I was looking for it there, and it was actually Grunt. It was in Grunt RequireJS or something like that. But anyway, looking at this stuff's going to basically make all these scripts available by the name of the key. So mylib will be available by mylib. jQuery will be available as jQuery. This underscore AMD, so that's a RequireJS compatible underscore, and it'll just be available as underscore. And I'm not going to get too much deeper into how this all works with the shim and stuff. I'll ask you to look at the documentation for that. But what I think is more interesting is sort of how we debug this. And so I'm not going to probably use this. I'm probably going to delete this and put this stuff somewhere else. But if you actually require these modules in, you can see that I'm requiring them by the same keys that I've defined here. And then these names are arbitrary, whatever I want. So jQuery is being mapped to $. Otherwise, I've mostly just kept the same names, but I could change them here because these are just function parameters. And then I set a debugger point, and I wanted to just sort of make sure that all these are getting loaded. Probably doesn't make sense for me to be loading Sanan Chai, for example, but just want to make sure I've got all this paths defined correctly. So just simply running grunt server will open this up in our browser, or it should. So I don't need like that copy stuff, but take care of that later. So I'm going to do Command Option I to open up the tools, and I'm actually going to reload this so my debugger breakpoint stops. And I'm not worried about my call stack. Let's just see. Okay, so this is our jQuery. This is our backbone underscore. Everything's in there that Sinan is undefined, so I need to see what's going on with that at some point. But I'm not too concerned just yet. I'll hold up on that. So if I hit the escape key, I can also test that these guys are available. There's backbone, jQuery. I could do $. Sinan is showing up as undefined, so that'll be something I'll have to debug. Sinan Chai is coming through. Okay, so anyway, that's sort of a tip for how to debug the RequireJS setup for your app scripts main. And then if we let that run, we've got our sort of boilerplate coming through there. So that's the main piece of, did we set this up the last time, right? So this was our component .json, which is what we used when we did our Bower install. So that installed the dependencies in the first place. And just sort of review here, that put everything in app components. There are my libraries. And so that's why we set up this this app main as such. Okay, so that's getting sort of the main production website or whatever going. Let's look at getting the tests to go using RequireJS. So that's under our test index. And the first thing I want to do is find, I made a vanilla sort of install, and I want to look at the test that just comes when you do a vanilla Yeoman install there. Crash dumps, nice. What happened? Let's try that one more time. Why wouldn't that load? There it goes. Okay, so this is sort of like the boilerplate that you get when you say that, what did we say we wanted? We installed all those backbone and Sinan dependencies, but for Yeoman we basically said, yeah, we want the bootstrap stuff, but most importantly we want the RequireJS stuff. But the boilerplate test that it gives you is just really something for testing within here. So you could put tests, here and it'll run, but there's no RequireJS dependency. And RequireJS or AMD, what it's trying to do is asynchronously queue up all these scripts and get them to load correctly. And this just isn't going to work for us. So so that's what you get by default. I would expect by answering yes to RequireJS that this would have been set up with a basic example script, like what I'm going to show you now, but it isn't, and so we have to do it ourselves. And it was really tedious. What I had to do was I had to create a symbolic link to the scripts directory into tests. So if I go into cd backbone, this is where my project is, and if I cd into tests and I list it out, you can see, ignore this one, but I've created a symbolic link up to my app scripts. Why did I do this? Well, when you run grunt test, the server is mounted to the test directory. So it's a little different than when you run your main Yeoman application. So this was just like link -s, and I had to go up into the main directory, app, scripts, and then dot, and that just put put scripts right there on my current path. And so with that, I was able to do the same thing where I go to scripts main and then grabbed the RequireJS. And another thing I wanted to show you, there's probably 100 ways I could have done this, but it was pretty challenging just to get it to work. There's no RequireJS inside vendor, so I also had to do a symlink here, and I just grabbed the one that's already in Grunt RequireJS. I suppose I could have just had this source point to that as well. Probably doesn't matter. So let me get back to the directory we were working in here. Okay, so with that, well, stepping back, how did I know I even had this correct, right? Because you can try up a directory, over a directory. It's pretty hard to get paths correct sometimes. And if you come from a Java background and you've dealt with class paths and setting the path, or really any setup for any programming language, you have to deal with this. So what you can do, because remember, you're running this all in Phantom.js, a headless web browser. So troubleshooting it, you can just do this, console log, and this is probably really bastard-like, but just do this. Try to see if the object even exists. This is probably unnecessary. I could probably do this a much better way, but if I now run grunt test, actually let me make something so I can see all this. And let's just do some line separators. Okay, so now if I run grunt test, I want to see that require object exists. I could probably say define any of the RequireJS stuff that should be there. And I got to get rid of that some of the stuff I'm not using. But okay, well, you can see there's where I started my test. So RequireJS is defined, and if I delete that and run my tests again, and I'll back up and show you what mylib is, or mylib spec and all that in a second. I'm not sure why I'm getting these undefined. I don't even know what's printed out. Debugging this, as you can imagine, I had a ton of console logs all over the place. So I have something going there that's undefined. But the important part is that my test is working, and I've got one assertion passed. So what is mylib spec? It's sort of unimportant, but just so we can see what's going on. Here's the spec, and it's, if you recall, in the main.js, sorry, I'm going to bounce around here, we set up mylib as a RequireJS module ID, I forget what they call it, but it's now available anywhere that I want to use the RequireJS conventions. I have access to that, including my tests. So I'm just saying define mylib and passing it in. And so now this is my mylib here is my production mylib, but I'm in my test, and I'm just going to call mylib lib, and I've made a simple add function, and I just want to test that it's working, right? And actually, this is left over from I was debugging before. I like to make a test fail on purpose just to make sure I'm not getting a false positive. So this should now fail, just to make sure I'm in there. I could also put a console log in there. Headless, working with headless browsers, don't be afraid of console log, because you don't have the great debugging tools that you have with Chrome DevTools. Anybody out there that has great tips for debugging Phantom.js or any headless browser where you can debug and step through stuff in a reasonable way, I'd love to hear back from you. But console logging works too. So you can see it's failing, and this is the title of our test spec, or rather our describe, and then here's our test spec. So we know we're working properly. And so this is kind of a pointless little pedantic library and test, but it would be nice if when I said yes to RequireJS with Yeoman, since it's being opinionated and giving me Mocha, I would like it to give me something like this free. I don't know how it would. I don't know if it probably shouldn't be putting symbolic links in, but I don't know. They could probably figure out a better way to do it than I have. But I think it's reasonable to want that from my sort of workflow build system. So, they're evolving, and maybe they'll get to that. They'll probably see this. I really want to get some time to fork the repo and play with it, and maybe be able to contribute that so I can stop complaining about it and help out, but just haven't had time yet. Okay, so that shows that, let's just recap what's going on here. We've got, let's look at it from a directory structure point of view. In app scripts, we have mylib, and that's this library that I've defined. Just basically wanted to define it within RequireJS and make sure that I could run a spec against it. So that's an app script. And if we close up app and test right off my root project, I have test spec mylib spec, and that's the spec we were looking at. And magically, as I was saying, we can ask for mylib, which is up and over 2 directories basically, but because we set it up with that RequireJS, it's now available here, right? Do I need to recap that? Maybe, yeah. So that was all done here, where we, well, first of all, we put scripts as a symlink into test, so it was visible from our current directory, and so that moves basically an alias of everything that's in app scripts into test scripts, right? And I showed you that earlier. So then we get RequireJS, and we go to the scripts main, and we basically set up all of our dependencies. And again, that's why I'm able to do this kind of a thing and just say, give me my lib, because it's already set up. Okay. I know I'm zipping around this. There's quite a bit involved with setting up a RequireJS system, so I don't really know a way not to do that. And then this is the index HTML for in our test directory, not the one in app, which is our production. And this thing. Now let's just look real quickly at how we set this up. So the important part is that we need to get RequireJS set up, and then when we require our spec, once we've got that loaded, so imagine sort of from a time point of view that RequireJS fires up, and there's all these calls to set up our scripts. It's going to take a second or whatever to load those guys in, and once they're ready, then this guy will load, and here's my lib spec. I'm not using it, but once I get into here, everything's been loaded, and now I've loaded just my individual spec, and then I require this runner mocha, and that the important part for us is that guy is going to call mocha run. And let me show that to you. This does come with this whole script does come with Yeoman. So right there, they're calling mocha run. Otherwise, I would have had to have called this myself. And then we're off running, and our tests should work. Again, to debug all this, don't be afraid to use judicious use of console log, and just log objects that you know are associated, like with the way I did with require. I could have also said console log define, and if that is undefined or doesn't show up, then I know I've got a problem. And just thinking if there was anything else here, I think that's about it. There's a lot to set up, obviously, and this is probably the most painful part of your project is getting all these dependencies set up. And hopefully, as Yeoman evolves, this particular part will be a little less painful. I think it's reasonable to want a boilerplate RequireJS test setup, especially since they're giving me Mocha and Chai anyway. Okay, that's about it. Hopefully next time, my next video for this series, I'd like to tinker with Backbone. So we'll probably use a Mocha test to sort of learn about Backbone and maybe look at some of its source code. And then maybe we'll build a simple project. All right, that's all for now.